Last night, I heard noises in the backyard. It wasn't a loud bang or a scream. It was something worse, a soft, insistent sound, as if someone were dragging themselves along the side of my house, trying not to be heard. I lay frozen in bed, the comforter pulled up to my chin, feeling my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Where are you watching from today? Leave your location in the comments, hit like, and subscribe to the channel. But allow me to tell you from the beginning how a 2-year-old American grandmother became the best uncertified private investigator you've ever met. That Wednesday morning, March 15th, I woke up early, as always. At 62, my body doesn't need an alarm clock anymore. Or maybe it's just that after 4 decades of waking up at 5 a.m. to make breakfast for a family, my internal clock is permanently set to mom mode. Hope, my only daughter, was turning 32 that Friday, and I had planned the perfect surprise. Well, as perfect as a surprise can be when your daughter is a digital marketing executive who has probably already checked her calendar and analyzed the suspicious pattern of calls between her friends. But a mother has the right to dream, doesn't she? I dressed in my favorite blue blouse, the one Hope gave me last year, telling me it made me look sophisticated yet accessible. I never knew what that meant, but coming from a woman who uses words like synergy and optimization in casual conversation, I took it as a compliment. The plan was simple: arrive at her apartment at 2 p.m. when she was supposedly in an important board meeting that would last until 5. Her boyfriend, Edward, was going to give me the keys. He'd had a copy for 3 months, something that seemed rushed to me, but I kept it to myself because, for once in my life, my daughter seemed truly happy. And Edward seemed like a good man, 35 years old, systems engineer at the same tech firm where Hope worked. He had that slightly formal politeness that reminded me of my late husband when we were young. He always stood up when I entered the room. He always asked about my health. He always insisted on carrying the grocery bags when I visited. Of course, there was also Sophie Daniels, the best friend Hope had recently acquired at work, 28 years old. Blonde hair that changed shades every month, and that smile that made you feel like the least interesting person in the world. They had connected immediately, according to Hope, because they both shared the same aggressive entrepreneurial vision. I had a different vision regarding Sophie, but I learned a long time ago that telling your adult daughter you don't like her friend is the social equivalent of tattooing meddling mother-in-law on your forehead. I took the bus downtown. Yes, the bus, because unlike my daughter who views Uber as a basic utility like running water, I still believe that paying $25 for a 20-minute ride is highway robbery. During the trip, I reviewed my mental list. Gold balloons, Hope's favorites since she was a little girl. Red velvet cake from Miller's Bakery, her absolute favorite, fresh flowers, and enough sliders and buffalo wings to feed the 15 friends who were supposedly coming. What I didn't have on my list was an amateur detective kit, but life has a funny way of preparing you for things you never knew you'd need. I arrived at Hope's building exactly at 2 p.m., a modern high-rise in the trendy part of the city, with that air of new money that screams, "People who understand Bitcoin and quinoa live here." The doorman, Mr. Henderson, knew me well. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Saunders. Coming to see Miss Hope?" "Today is the surprise, Mr. Henderson." "Remember, if she asks, you haven't seen me." Mr. Henderson winked. "Which Mrs. Saunders?" "I don't know any Mrs. Saunders." I went up to the 8th floor, humming Happy Birthday under my breath. Edward had given me the keys the night before, along with a smile so genuine that for a moment I thought maybe my daughter had finally found one of the good ones. How naive I was. I opened the apartment door and immediately noticed something was wrong. The TV was on, but on mute. There were 2 coffee mugs on the coffee table, both still steaming, and there was a feminine laugh coming from the master bathroom. It wasn't Hope's laugh. I stood frozen in the entryway, holding my bags full of decorations, feeling as if the world had decided to change the rules of the game without notifying me. The laughter was accompanied by another voice, a male voice I definitely recognized. Edward. For a moment, my brain refused to process what I was hearing. After all, Edward was supposedly at a work conference until 4. He had told me specifically the night before. "Mrs. Saunders, the conference ends at 4, so I'll be back by 4:30 to help with the final preparations." But that was definitely his voice. Along with that laugh, I now identified as belonging to Sophie. I set the bags on the floor with the care of a bomb disposal specialist and headed toward the hallway. Every step seemed to sound like a hammer hitting concrete, but apparently, they were too busy to notice. "Edward, baby, this is perfect," I heard Sophie's voice, clear as water. "Hope suspects nothing." "I know," Edward replied. And there was something in his tone that chilled my blood. It wasn't the voice of the courteous, considerate man I knew. It was different, colder. After today, everything changes. I moved closer to the bathroom door. It was slightly ajar, and through the vanity mirror, I could partially see what I didn't want to see. Edward and Sophie in the bathtub in a position that was definitely not included in the handbook of platonic friendship. But it wasn't the betrayal that paralyzed me. It was the conversation that followed. "Do you think it's been enough time?" Sophie asked. "Yeah, it's been 4 months. Enough time for her to trust me completely. Access to her accounts is almost complete." "And what about her mother? Does she still suspect?" Edward laughed in a way I had never heard before. "The old bat? Please. She's so desperate to see me married she'd accept it if I married a cactus. She thinks I'm the perfect son-in-law." Sophie laughed too. "Poor thing, she has no idea what's coming." In that moment, something snapped inside me. It wasn't my heart. That would have been too dramatic. It was something more practical. My capacity to be the accommodating mother-in-law who stays quiet and smiles while others make decisions for her. With the calm of a woman who has raised teenagers and survived 3 decades of marriage, I closed the bathroom door from the outside and turned the key that was conveniently left in the lock. Then I took out my phone and dialed the first number. "Hope, it's Mom. I know you're in your meeting, but I need you to come home right now. It's urgent." "Mom, what happened? Are you okay?" "I'm perfectly fine, honey. Just come, and don't tell anyone where you're going." I hung up and dialed the second number. "Charlie? This is Mary Saunders, Hope's mother. We met at the company Christmas dinner." "Yes, exactly. Listen, where is your wife, Sophie? Right now?" "There was a lull at work," she told me. "Why?" "Because I have something very interesting to show you. Can you come to my daughter's apartment? I'm sending you the address." While I waited, I sat on Hope's sofa and listened to the increasingly desperate sounds coming from the bathroom. First, they tried to open the door naturally, then with more force, finally with absolute panic. "Hey! The door is stuck!" yelled Edward. "It's not stuck, you idiot." "Someone locked us in," replied Sophie, and for the first time since I met her, her voice had lost that irritating confidence. For the moment, I allowed myself a small smile as I opened a magazine on the coffee table. After all, I had time to kill before the real show started. Because one thing I had learned in 62 years of life, when someone underestimates an older woman, they are usually making the most expensive mistake of their life. Let me tell you how we got to this situation, because the story of a betrayed woman always begins long before the moment of betrayal. My daughter Hope was born on the 17th of March, 1991, after 8 hours of labor that swore my husband Ralph would need therapy for the rest of his life. From the moment they placed her in my arms, I knew this girl was going to be different. While other babies cried from hunger, Hope cried for scheduling. If I didn't give her the bottle at exactly the same times every day, she threw tantrums that could be heard 3 blocks away. By age 2, she had already organized her toys by color, size, and frequency of use. By 5, she corrected me when I used the wrong grammar. Ralph used to joke, saying our daughter was born with a built-in planner and an inefficiency detector. I simply prayed she wouldn't decide to reorganize the whole house according to her standards of perfection. When Ralph died in a car accident 7 years ago, Hope was 25 and had just finished her MBA. Instead of collapsing like any normal person, she put on her most formal black suit for the funeral and announced she would take the reins of the situation. "Mom," she told me that same night, organizing her father's life insurance papers with the efficiency of a CPA, "I'm going to make sure you never have to worry about money." And she kept her word. In 7 years, she went from being a junior associate at a digital marketing agency to running her own department at Strategic Digital Innovation Incorporated, a company that, according to her, optimizes consumer experience across multi-platform interfaces, and according to me, probably does something related to the internet. Her salary tripled in 5 years. She moved into that apartment in the ritzy part of town. She bought a car that cost more than I earned in the last 3 years. And more importantly, she insisted on paying me a monthly allowance that allowed me to leave my job at the dry cleaners and live comfortably for the first time in my life. "It's not charity, Mom," she would tell me every time I tried to protest. "It's an investment. You invested your whole life raising and caring for me. Now it's time to reap the dividends." That was my hope. Even her gestures of love sounded like a PowerPoint presentation. But don't misunderstand me. I was proud of her, prouder than words can express. After years of watching her work until 2 a.m., studying, listening to her rehearse presentations in her bedroom mirror, enduring her nervous breakdowns when she thought she wasn't good enough finally, life was giving her what she deserved. However, something changed last year. Hope started talking about expanding her professional network and building strategic alliances. In normal terms, that meant she started going out more, attending company events, and bringing new names into our weekly phone conversations. The first name was Edward Morris. "He's the head of the tech development department," she explained during one of our monthly dinners in October. "Very smart, very focused. We're collaborating on a major project." The second time she mentioned him, he wasn't the department head anymore. He was Edward. The third time, Edward and I went for coffee after the meeting. By December, Edward was coming to dinner with us, and I have to admit, I was impressed. Not only was he handsome, though he definitely was, with those sharp features and brown eyes that seemed to truly listen to what you were saying, but he also had that old-fashioned courtesy you don't see much in men his age anymore. He stood up when I entered the room. He asked about my health with genuine interest. He insisted on helping with the dishes after dinner. He brought flowers for Hope, but he also brought little gifts for me, a pastry from a new bakery he'd discovered or a book he thought I'd like. "He's perfect," I told my friend Carmen after the third dinner. "Too perfect. Men like that don't exist." "Oh, Mary," Carmen replied while we drank coffee in her kitchen. "You're too suspicious. Your daughter deserves a good man." And she was right. Hope deserved everything good life could offer her, so I swallowed my reservations and decided to give Edward the benefit of the doubt. It was then that Sophie appeared. "There's a new girl at work," Hope told me in January. "Sophie Daniels. She's incredibly talented." Unlike Edward, who had been introduced gradually into our conversations, Sophie appeared like an explosion. Out of nowhere, Hope couldn't stop talking about her. Sophie had this brilliant idea for a client. Sophie had solved a problem they'd been trying to fix for months. Sophie knew this amazing restaurant. Sophie. I met her in February when Hope organized a small get-together at her apartment to celebrate a completed project. Sophie arrived, dressed as if she were going to a photo shoot for a business magazine. Immaculate white blazer, skirt that cost more than my monthly rent, heels that made an authoritative sound when she walked. 28 years old, blonde, obviously dyed with that confidence possessed by women who grew up being the prettiest in the classroom. "Mrs. Saunders," she said when Hope introduced us, extending a manicured hand. "I've heard so much about you. Hope adores you." Her smile was perfect. Her tone was perfect. Everything about her was so perfectly correct that my maternal instinct immediately went to code red. But what really bothered me wasn't Sophie herself. It was how Hope changed when she was around her. My daughter, who had always been secure and direct, suddenly started seeking Sophie's approval for everything. "Don't you think, Sophie," became her favorite catchphrase. When Sophie spoke, Hope looked at her as if she were receiving divine revelations. And Sophie, for her part, was clearly aware of her influence. "Hope, darling," she would say with that condescending tone she used when speaking to me. "You really should update your wardrobe. Those blouses are very conservative for someone in your position." Or, "Oh, Hope, you have to start frequenting places where the right people are. You can't advance your career if you only socialize with, well, you know." I was included in that, you know. When I tried to talk to Hope about my reservations, I met resistance I had never seen in her. "Mom, Sophie is my friend and my colleague. She's trying to help me. My baby. I'm just saying that maybe." "Mom, with all due respect, Sophie understands the modern corporate world in a way that it's different from your experience." That conversation was in February. By March, Sophie was practically part of the family, even though I had never received a formal invitation to accept her as such. And then something interesting happened. Edward and Sophie met during a joint department meeting in early March. According to Hope, They connected immediately over process optimization strategies, whatever that means. It's wonderful, Hope told me over the phone that night. My two favorite people from work are getting along so well. Suddenly, all group outings included Edward and Sophie. All dinners at home included Edward and Sophie. All of Hope's conversations included anecdotes about how brilliant this new alliance between her two favorite colleagues was. I watched from a distance, serving them coffee and pretending to smile while Edward explained the technical aspects of some project to Sophie, and Sophie gave him advice on how to position himself strategically within the company. There was something about the way they looked at each other that unsettled me, but every time I tried to define exactly what it was, I came to the conclusion that maybe I was the one seeing things where there were none. After all, what did a 2-year-old woman know about modern professional dynamics? But now, sitting on my daughter's sofa, listening to their desperate screams from the bathroom, I realized my maternal instinct had been right all along. The difference was that now I had proof, and more importantly, now I had a plan. Charlie Daniels arrived exactly 15 minutes after my call, and from the way he was sweating and breathing, it was evident he had run from his car to the elevator. "Mrs. Saunders," he said as soon as I opened the door, "is everything okay? Where is Sophie?" Charlie was completely different from his wife. Where Sophie was polished and calculated, he was genuine and a bit rough around the edges. 32 years old, civil contractor, with hands that showed he actually worked with them, and that direct way of speaking that doesn't need corporate filters. "She's here," I said with the calm of a woman who had just discovered she had a master's degree in drama without knowing it. "But before you see her, I need to explain something to you." The screams from the bathroom had stopped 5 minutes ago. Now, voices in normal tones could be heard, probably because they had exhausted all their obvious options and were trying to formulate a plan. "I don't understand," Charlie said, looking around the apartment. "Sophie told me she would be working late today. What is she doing here?" "That is exactly the right question, Charlie." I guided him to the sofa and poured him a glass of water. "When was the last time you spoke to Sophie?" "Today. This morning, before I left for work. She told me she had an important presentation and would be home late." Charlie frowned. "Mrs. Saunders, you're making me nervous. What is going on?" Before I could answer, we heard the sound of keys in the main lock. Hope had arrived. "Mom!" she shouted from the entrance. "Where are you? What is so urgent?" "In the living room, sweetie," I replied. "Come here, there's someone I want you to meet." Hope appeared in the hallway in her work suit, wearing that expression of controlled concern she put on when something interrupted her carefully planned schedule. She stopped dead when she saw Charlie. "Hello," she said with that automatic politeness she uses with strangers. "You must be Charlie Daniels," I replied for him. "The husband of Sophie," he said, standing up to shake her hand. I saw the confusion cross Hope's face like a storm cloud. "Sophie's husband? But what is he doing here? Where is Sophie?" "That," I said, standing up from the sofa, "is an excellent question." I walked toward the hallway leading to the bathroom, followed by Hope and Charlie. The sounds from the bathroom had returned. Now they were whispering urgently, probably trying to coordinate a story. "Sophie," I said loudly toward the closed door, "your husband is here." The silence that followed was so absolute I could hear the wall clock in the kitchen ticking the seconds. "My husband?" Sophie's voice sounded strangled. "What? What are you doing here, Charlie?" "I came because Mrs. Saunders called me," Charlie replied, and there was an edge to his voice that hadn't been there 5 minutes ago. "She told me she needed to show me something about my wife." "Mom!" Hope grabbed my arm. "What is happening? Why is Sophie in my bathroom? Why can't she come out?" "Because," I said with the satisfaction of a woman finally able to tell the truth without worrying about the consequences, "she's in there with Edward." I watched as the information processed in Hope's brain. First confusion, then gradual understanding, finally complete horror. "With Edward? My Edward, your Edward?" "Confirmed," I said. "I've been here 30 minutes listening to their conversation. And let me tell you, daughter, what I heard goes far beyond simple infidelity." Charlie had gone pale. "Sophie, is it true? Are you in there with another man?" "Charlie." "I can explain." Sophie's voice had lost all its corporate authority. Now she sounded like a little girl caught stealing candy. "Edward," Hope said toward the door, and her voice was so cold it reminded me of her father when he was truly angry. "Do you have something to say?" "Hope, Edward began, but his voice trailed off. Apparently, all his charms worked better when he wasn't literally trapped in a bathtub with another man's wife. Before you start with your explanations, I interrupted, is there anything else you need to know? I took out my phone and opened the voice recording app. Charlie, Hope, I want you to listen to this. I pressed play on the recording I had made over the last 30 minutes. My phone speaker was clear. Sophie, do you think it's been enough time? Edward, yeah, it's been 4 months. Enough time for her to trust me completely. Access to her accounts is almost complete. The silence in the hallway was deafening. Charlie leaned against the wall as if he had been physically punched. Hope looked at me with a mixture of horror and admiration. Keep listening, I said, and let the recording continue. And what about her mother? Does she still suspect? Edward, laughing. The old bat, please. She's so desperate to see me married she'd accept it if I married a cactus. She thinks I'm the perfect son-in-law. Poor thing, she has no idea what's coming. When I ended the recording, Charlie was shaking with fury, and Hope had gone completely white. Access to my accounts, whispered Hope. Edward, what are you talking about? It's complicated, Edward started from the bathroom. It's not complicated, shouted Charlie. It's theft and adultery. He started pounding on the bathroom door. Sophie, open this door right now. Charlie. Calm down, I said, putting myself between him and the door. Before you do anything you might regret, there is more information you need to have. More information? Hope looked at me as if she were seeing a stranger. Mom, what else do you know? I know Edward has been gathering information on your finances for months. I know Sophie has been manipulating you to distance you from the people who really love you. I turned toward the bathroom door. And I know that you two have gravely underestimated the old bat who discovered you. Mrs. Saunders, Edward said, and for the first time his voice sounded desperate. This is a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding, I repeated. Is it also a misunderstanding that you are naked in my daughter's bathtub with a married woman? Charlie made a sound that was half sob, half roar of fury. 5 years of marriage, he muttered. 5 years. Charlie, Sophie said from the bathroom, and now she was crying. Please, let me explain. Explain what? Replied Charlie. Explain how you've been sleeping with Mrs. Saunders' daughter's boyfriend? Explain how you've been planning to steal money? What do you want to explain, Sophie? Hope sat heavily on the hallway bench. I can't believe this. I can't believe I was so blind. You weren't blind, sweetie, I told her, sitting next to her. You were trusting. There's a difference. But all the signs were there. The way they looked at each other, how Sophie always knew things about Edward that he hadn't told me, how he always seemed to know exactly what to say when Sophie was present. Hope, Edward called from the bathroom. Please, I need to talk to you alone. No, I said firmly. The time for private conversations is over. From now on, everything is spoken in front of witnesses. I stood up and walked to the bathroom door. Edward, Sophie, I'm going to make you a proposal. You can come out of there when you have told me exactly what your plan was, the whole plan, without omitting details. And if I discover you are lying to me about anything at all, then the next conversation we have will be with the police present. We can't, Sophie started. Of course you can, I interrupted. Because the alternative is that Charlie calls the police right now for adultery, disturbance of peace, and Hope files charges for fraud. And believe me, after what I heard today, I have all the evidence I need to ruin your lives for the next 10 years. Mom, whispered Hope, did you really record all this? I showed her my phone. 3 minutes of clear evidence, including the part where they discuss accelerating the timeline because the old bat is starting to suspect. Charlie looked at me with an admiration I didn't expect. Mrs. Saunders, you are incredible. I'm not incredible, Charlie. I'm just a mother who knows her children well enough to know when something is wrong. From the bathroom came the sound of urgent murmurs. Edward and Sophie were obviously coordinating their response. You have 30 seconds, I announced, before Charlie calls the cops and Hope calls her bank to report fraudulent activity on her accounts. Okay, shouted Sophie. We'll tell you everything. Everything, I repeated. Starting with how much money you've stolen already. What I didn't know in that moment was that the answer to that question was going to be much more complicated than I expected, and that Edward and Sophie's plan was just the tip of the iceberg. Because when they started talking, I realized that my discovery of the day had saved Hope from something much worse than a simple financial scam. "You need to sit down for this," Sophie said from behind the bathroom door, and something in her tone made me fear what was coming. "We are already sitting," I lied, though in reality Charlie was pacing like a caged lion and Hope looked like she was considering punching a hole in the wall. "The plan," Edward began, then stopped. "God, I can't believe I'm saying this." "Say it," Hope demanded, separating every syllable like they were gunshots. "Sophie and I have been together for 8 months, Edward confessed. "Since before I started dating you. I felt as if someone had dumped a bucket of ice water over my head." 8 months, I repeated slowly. "But Edward and Hope have been dating for 4 months. "Exactly," said Edward, and I could hear the shame in his voice. The relationship with Hope was part of the plan. Charlie stopped dead in his tracks. "Part of what plan?" "We were going to scam money," Sophie said quickly, as if saying it fast made it less painful. "Edward was going to make Hope fall in love, get access to her finances, and then transfer the money to offshore accounts." "How much money?" asked Hope, and her voice was so controlled it scared me. "Everything," admitted Edward. "Your savings, your investments, your company retirement fund." We calculated approximately $1.2 million. The number fell like a bomb in the silence of the hallway. 1.2 million. Hope stood up so quickly she stumbled. $1.2 million. "You were going to steal my entire life." "Not everything," Sophie said quickly. "We were going to leave enough so it wasn't immediately obvious." "How considerate," Charlie yelled, as if that made it better. I was processing the information with the speed of an overloaded computer. "But if you've been together for 8 months, why did Sophie get into my daughter's company? Why become friends with Hope?" "Because we needed information," explained Sophie. "Hope is very private with her finances. She never tells anyone how much she earns or where she keeps her accounts. I needed to earn her trust to get that information. And I needed to distance her from the people who might suspect," added Edward. "Especially you, Mrs. Saunders. From the beginning, you were wary of me." "Because my maternal radar works better than the Wi-Fi in this house," I muttered. "So," said Hope slowly, "our whole friendship was fake. Every piece of advice you gave me, every night we spent talking about our dreams, every moment you made me feel like I finally found a sister, it was all a lie." "Not everything," whispered Sophie. "I actually started to like you." "Don't give me that," Hope exploded. "Don't you dare say you cared about me while planning to ruin my life." Charlie had started gently banging his head against the wall. "I can't believe this. I can't believe I married a criminal." "Charlie, I never wanted it to go this far," said Sophie. And now she was sobbing. At first it was just going to be quick money, but then the situation got complicated. "Complicated? How?" I asked. Because there was something in Sophie's tone telling me we still hadn't reached the bottom of the matter. There was a long pause before Edward answered. "It got complicated when we realized Hope was going to change her will." "My will?" Hope went pale. "How do you know about my will?" "Because," Edward said with a voice barely audible, "I was going to propose to you next month." The world stopped. Charlie stopped banging his head against the wall. Hope stopped breathing. I felt as if the floor had turned liquid under my feet. "You were going to propose?" whispered Hope. "To have full legal access to your finances as your husband," admitted Edward, "and to make sure that when you were gone, I would inherit everything." "When I was gone," repeated Hope. "What does 'when I was gone' mean?" The silence that followed was the most terrifying I had heard in my life. "Edward," I said with a calm I didn't feel, "exactly what were you going to do to my daughter?" "We weren't going to hurt anyone," said Sophie quickly. "We just needed her to disappear for a while." Charlie gagged, literally bent over and dry-heaved in my daughter's hallway. "An accident," Hope repeated like a robot. "You were going to kill me and make it look like an accident." "No," shouted Edward. "We weren't going to kill you. We just needed you to disappear for a while." "Disappear for a while?" My voice went up 3 octaves. "What does that mean?" "We were going to drug you," confessed Sophie. "Some pills that would make you sleep deeply for several days, enough time to transfer the money and disappear. But the drugs we got," added Edward slowly, "were stronger than we thought. There was a possibility you wouldn't wake up." "A possibility," repeated Charlie. "A possibility you'd kill an innocent woman for money." "And if I didn't wake up," said Hope with a voice I didn't recognize. You were going to keep all my money as my grieving widower and my best friend in mourning. Hope, Edward started. No, screamed Hope. Don't say my name. You have no right to say my name. She got up from the sofa and walked to the bathroom door. Edward Morris, I loved you. I loved you so much I changed my entire life to include you. I stopped seeing my friends because Sophie convinced me they were toxic for my growth. I stopped telling my problems to my mother because you told me I needed to be more independent. I changed the way I dress, the way I talk, the way I think, all because I wanted to be the woman you deserved. Her voice cracked, but she continued. And you never loved me. You didn't even see me as a person. You just saw numbers in a bank account and an idiot naive enough to hand over her life for love. Hope, and you, Sophie, she continued, turning toward the door. You made me believe I had finally found a true friend, someone who understood me, who supported me, who wanted the best for me. You made me distance myself from my mother, the only person who truly loves me, because you convinced me it was codependent to keep a close relationship with her. Hope turned to me with tears running down her cheeks. Mom, forgive me. Forgive me for doubting your instinct. Forgive me for shutting you out of my life. Forgive me for being so stupid. I hugged her with the strength of a woman who had just snatched her daughter back from the edge of a cliff. You have nothing to apologize for, my love. Nothing at all. Over her shoulder, I saw Charlie dialing numbers on his phone. Who are you calling? I asked him. The police, he answered without looking up. This is attempted murder and conspiracy to commit fraud. Charlie, wait, I said quickly before he hit send. I need 5 more minutes with them. Because, I said, looking toward the bathroom door, I need to know what else they are hiding, and I have the feeling we still haven't reached the worst part. Worst part? Whispered Hope. What can be worse than this? I don't know, sweetie, but after 30 years of being a mother, I've learned that when someone confesses something terrible, it's usually because they are trying to hide something even worse. I walked to the bathroom door and placed my hand on the cold surface. Edward, Sophie, I'm going to ask you a very simple question. And if you lie to me, I swear on my husband's memory, you are going to spend the next 20 years in prison. I waited a moment for the weight of my words to settle. Are there other victims? The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. Other victims? Edward's voice sounded like he had swallowed crushed glass. What do you mean? Don't play dumb with me, I replied, with the patience of a woman who had just discovered her tolerance for lies had permanently expired. You two didn't wake up one day and decide to scam my daughter. This is too well planned, too coordinated. How many other women have you done this to? Mom, whispered Hope, do you think I wasn't the first? My daughter, con artists don't start with $1,000,000 plans. They start small and up the ante. I moved closer to the bathroom door. Sophie, how many best friends have you had in the last 2 years? There was a murmur of urgent conversation behind the door before Sophie answered. 3, she admitted finally. Before Hope, there were 3. Charlie dropped onto the sofa as if someone had cut his legs out from under him. 3. You've been doing this for years. And Edward, I asked, how many girlfriends have you had that you casually met through work? The same 3, said Edward. And for the first time since this confession began, he sounded genuinely ashamed. But with them, we didn't get this far. Define this far. With the first one, Carmen Ross, we only got $5,000 before she realized something was wrong. How did she realize? Asked Hope. Her brother was an accountant, explained Sophie. He checked her finances and realized there were strange transfers. Carmen broke up with Edward immediately. And the other 2? I insisted. Lucy Vance, continued Edward. We got $25,000 from her, but her ex-boyfriend kept in touch and started asking uncomfortable questions about me. And the 3rd, Patty Miller, said Sophie. And there was something different in her voice. With her we got further. How much further? Asked Charlie. And I could hear he already knew he didn't want the answer. $90,000, admitted Edward. And we almost got married. Almost, I repeated. What happened? There was another long pause. Patty had an accident, said Sophie quietly. The air in the hallway became thick as gelatin. What kind of accident? Asked Hope with a voice that seemed to come from very far away. She fell down the stairs of her apartment, explained Edward, the night before our wedding. Oh my God, shouted Charlie. You killed her." "No," protested Sophie. "It was a real accident. Patty had been drinking because she was nervous about the wedding. She tripped over her own feet. And coincidentally, this happened after you had already transferred her money?" I asked. "Not all the money," said Edward defensively. "Just what we had been able to access up to that point." "Patty survived," added Sophie quickly. "She was in a coma for 3 weeks, but she survived, although she had brain damage." "Brain damage," repeated Hope as if the words were in a foreign language. "Mild," Edward rushed to clarify. "Short-term memory problems, difficulty concentrating, nothing that couldn't be managed." "And you guys took off while she was in the hospital?" asked Charlie. "We canceled the wedding out of respect," said Sophie. And the audacity of those words took my breath away. "We said it was too painful to continue after the tragedy." "But you kept her money," I observed. "Patty doesn't remember the transfers," admitted Edward. "The brain damage affected her memory of the weeks prior to the accident. I sat on the floor of the hallway because my legs could no longer hold me. "Let me see if I understand this correctly," I said slowly. "You have scammed 4 women. From the first, you stole $5,000. From the second, $25,000. From the third, $90,000. And the third ended up with permanent brain damage." "But it was an accident," insisted Sophie. "A real accident. And now," I continued, "you got to my daughter with a plan to steal $1.2 million and possibly kill her in the process." "We weren't going to kill her," protested Edward. "The drugs were just going to make her sleep." "The same drugs that were stronger than you thought?" asked Hope. "The same drugs you admitted might not let me wake up?" "It was a minimal risk," said Sophie. "We calculated there was only a 10% chance that—" "10%!" screamed Charlie. "You were willing to accept a 10% chance of murdering an innocent woman." "And after Hope," I said, because my brain had started connecting patterns that terrified me. "Who came next? You already had the next victim in your sights." The silence was deafening. "Edward," I said with a deadly calm, "you already had the next victim in your sights." There was a girl in HR," admitted Edward. "Anna Harris. 28 years old, recently divorced, with a good savings fund, and you had already started the approach process." "Sophie had started becoming her friend," confessed Edward. "But they had only spoken a few times." Hope jumped to her feet. "We have to warn Anna. We have to call the police right now." "Wait," I said, getting up too. "There is one more thing I need to know." I moved closer to the bathroom door and put both hands on it. "Patty Miller. Where is she now?" "In a rehab clinic in Denver," replied Sophie. "Her family moved there after the accident to be close to specialized facilities." "And you have never tried to contact her? Never tried to apologize? Help with her medical expenses?" "How are we going to help without admitting guilt?" asked Edward. "Besides, Patty doesn't remember anything about us." "But her family remembers," said Charlie slowly. "Her family remembers the boyfriend who disappeared after their daughter had a convenient accident." "It wasn't convenient," protested Sophie. "It was the pattern," shouted Hope. "Don't you see it?" Carmen realized. "So you took off fast." Lucy started suspecting. "So you took off." Patty had her accident. "So you took off." And I was going to be next. "But with you, it was going to be different," said Edward weakly. "With you, we had planned everything perfectly." "With you, they were going to make sure the accident was fatal," corrected Charlie. I moved away from the door and walked to the living room window. I needed fresh air and a moment to process everything I had just heard. 4 victims, 1 with permanent brain damage, a 5th victim already in their sights, and my daughter had been weeks away from becoming the 6th, or possibly the first fatal victim. "Hope," I said, turning to her. "Call the police, now." "It's about time," muttered Charlie, and dialed 911 on his own phone. "Mom," said Hope while he dialed, "how did you know? How did you know to ask the right questions?" "Because," I answered, looking toward the bathroom door, where 2 people had destroyed multiple lives for money. "After 62 years in this world, I've learned that when someone lies to you about something small, it's usually because they are hiding something big. And because," I added more to myself, "a mother always knows when something is trying to hurt her children, even when her children don't know." While we waited for the police to arrive, I couldn't help thinking about Patty Miller in Denver, fighting every day with the consequences of an accident that perhaps hadn't been as accidental as everyone thought. But that, I decided, would be an investigation for after Edward and Sophie were safely behind bars. For now, I had to concentrate on the fact that my daughter was alive, she was safe, and she had learned one of life's most important lessons. That sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who tell you exactly what you want to hear. The sound of sirens in the distance told me that justice was finally on its way. The police arrived exactly 17 minutes after our call's time that Edward and Sophie used to beg, threaten, and finally attempt to negotiate from their makeshift prison in the bathroom. "Mrs. Saunders," Edward had said 5 minutes earlier, "we can reach an agreement. We'll return all the money we took from the other victims." "With what money?" I had replied. "I bet you already spent it on expensive clothes and romantic vacations." I had been right. When Officers Martin and Reynolds arrived at the apartment, the first thing they noticed was the incongruity between two people supposedly successful professionals locked in a bathroom and a 62-year-old grandmother who had strategically outmaneuvered them. "Ma'am," Officer Martin said, after I explained the basic situation, "are you telling me you single-handedly detained 2 con artists?" "I didn't detain them," I clarified as I handed them my phone with the recordings. "I just retained them until you guys could arrive to do your job." Officer Reynolds, a young man who probably wasn't much older than Hope, listened to the recordings with an expression that went from skepticism to horror in the span of 5 minutes. This is solid evidence," he said. Finally. "Do you have any additional documentation?" "I have this," I said, handing him a folder I had prepared while we waited. During the last 20 minutes, I had been meticulously documenting everything: times, names, dates, and every detail Edward and Sophie had confessed. Yes, I'm obsessive about organization. It's a charming flaw I inherited from my mother and apparently comes in handy when you're building a criminal case. "Mrs. Saunders," Officer Martin said after reviewing my notes, "would you consider working for the department, because this documentation is better than that of many professional investigators?" "Thanks, but I already have a full-time job being a detective, Grandma," I replied, although apparently it's more dangerous than I thought. When they finally opened the bathroom door, Edward and Sophie came out with the dignity of 2 wet raccoons. Sophie immediately started crying and asking to speak to a lawyer. Edward, to his limited credit, remained silent until they put the handcuffs on him. "Hope," he said as the officers took him out of the apartment. "I'm sorry. I really am sorry." My daughter looked at him with a coldness I didn't know she possessed. "Edward, the only reason I feel anything right now is pity. Pity because you are so pathetic that you needed to hurt innocent women to feel successful." Those weren't the words of the sweet and trusting Hope I had raised. They were the words of a woman who had learned in the span of 2 hours that people can be much crueler than she had ever imagined. After they took Edward and Sophie away, we remained in silence in Hope's apartment. Charlie had decided to accompany the officers to file additional charges for adultery and fraud, leaving us alone for the first time since this nightmare began. "Mom," said Hope, sitting on her sofa and looking around the apartment as if it were the first time she was seeing it. "I'm scared." "Scared of what, my baby?" "Scared that I can never trust anyone again. Scared that every person who smiles at me is calculating how much money they can get out of me. Scared that I'm so naive this will happen again." I sat next to her and took her hand. "Hope, do you know the difference between being naive and being trusting? A naive person doesn't learn from their mistakes. A trusting person learns to trust better." I looked her directly in the eyes. "You aren't naive. You were the victim of people who are experts in manipulation. But I should have seen the signs." "What signs?" "That Edward was polite, that Sophie seemed like a good friend, that both behaved exactly like 2 normal people developing a genuine friendship with you." Hope sighed. "When you put it like that, besides," I added with a smile, "now you have something you didn't have before." "What?" "A mother who has proven to be quite good at detecting liars." I leaned back on the sofa, "and who clearly has no problems confronting them when necessary." Hope laughed for the first time in hours. "Mom, you're amazing. The way you handled all this. It was like watching a professional detective in action. 62 years of life experience, sweetie. That includes dealing with dishonest salesmen, lying politicians, and creative teenagers with excuses." I winked at her. Edward and Sophie were amateurs compared to the time your cousin Lupita tried to convince me she had been studying at the library when she had been seen making out with Roberto behind the church. We were laughing when my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number. Mrs. Saunders. This is Detective Russo from the Special Investigations Division. I need to speak with you about the case you reported today. Of course, Detective. What do you need to know? I'd prefer to discuss it in person. Can you come to the station tomorrow morning and bring all the documentation you have on Edward Morris and Sophie Daniels? Of course. Can I ask why Special Investigations is interested in this? There was a pause before she answered. Because, Mrs. Saunders, we believe your discovery today has exposed something much bigger than a two-person operation. After hanging up, I looked at Hope, who had been listening to my side of the conversation. Mom, what do you think that means? I thought about the meticulous details of Edward and Sophie's plan, the way they had calculated exactly how much money was worth the risk, their specific knowledge about different types of drugs and their effects, the careful progression from small victims to large ones. I think, sweetie, that Edward and Sophie weren't working alone. What do you mean? I mean, the plan was too sophisticated, too professional. Someone was teaching them, someone with experience. Hope went pale. Do you think there are more people like them? Not just more people like them, I said, getting up to close the curtains. Suddenly I felt as if someone might be watching us. I think there is a whole organization of people like them, and now they are looking for us. Mom, don't worry, I said with a confidence I didn't fully feel. Tomorrow we're going to find out. That night, Hope slept at my house for the first time since she had moved into her apartment. Not because I asked her to come, but because she showed up at my door at 11 p.m. with a suitcase and tears in her eyes. I can't be alone in that place, she told me. Everything reminds me of him. I set her up in her childhood room, which I had kept exactly the same since she left. While I prepared the sheets that smelled of lavender, I realized that for the first time in years, my daughter needed me. Not for money, not for career advice, not for validation on her life choices. She needed me for the most basic and fundamental thing, safety. And while I listened to her crying softly in her room for the man she thought loved her, for the friend she thought understood her, for the innocence she had lost in the span of an afternoon, I made a decision. If there was a bigger organization behind this, if there were more people hurting women like my daughter, I was going to find them. After all, now I had experience being a detective, and unlike Edward and Sophie, I really knew how to protect the people I loved. The police station at 8 a.m. was exactly as depressing as I expected. Coffee that smelled like wet cardboard, fluorescent lights that made everyone look like corpses, and the kind of tense silence that suggested no one had slept enough. Detective Russo turned out to be a woman of about 45 with short gray hair and the kind of direct gaze that told me immediately she didn't tolerate nonsense. Mrs. Saunders, she said when I sat across from her desk. I want to thank you for the documentation you provided yesterday. It was exceptionally detailed. You're welcome, Detective. What have you found out? Several interesting things. She opened a folder and took out photographs. Do you recognize any of these people? The first two photos were obviously Edward and Sophie, but taken in different contexts. Edward wearing an expensive suit in what looked like a formal event. Sophie on a beach in a bikini that probably cost more than my monthly rent. When were these photos taken? I asked. Edward at a corporate event in Cancun 6 months ago. Sophie in Puerto Vallarta 3 months ago. Detective Russo looked at me carefully. Did your daughter mention if they had traveled recently? Edward told Hope he was saving money to buy a house. Sophie told her she was paying off debts from her previous divorce. Both lies, obviously. She took out more photographs. These were taken from their social media before they wiped them last night. The following photos made me feel physically sick. Edward and Sophie in expensive restaurants, in luxury hotels, on what were clearly expensive vacations. But they weren't alone. Who are the other people in the photos? That is the million-dollar question. Detective Russo pointed to an older couple in one of the photographs. Meet Robert and Claudia Mullins. He is 55, she is 52. Supposedly, they are business mentors. Supposedly? In reality, we believe they are running a school for romance scams. I felt as if someone had dumped ice in my stomach. A school for scams, an operation that teaches young, attractive couples how to scam single people with money. Detective Russo took out a diagram. It works like this. The Mullins identify potential victims, people with good jobs, significant savings, and aspects of vulnerability. Recently divorced, deaths in the family, social isolation. Like Hope, after Sophie convinced her to distance herself from me, I muttered, "Exactly." Then they train couples like Edward and Sophie in specific manipulation techniques: how to gain trust, how to isolate victims from their support systems, how to obtain financial information. Detective Russo showed me more photographs. There were at least 6 different couples at various events, all young, all attractive, all posing with the Mullins, like one big, happy family. How many victims are we talking about? Based on what we've uncovered in the last 18 hours, we believe this organization has been operating for at least 3 years. We've tentatively identified 15 confirmed victims. 15. The number hit me like a slap. 15 women like my daughter, and 2 men. The scam works both ways. Detective Russo closed the folder. "Mrs. Saunders, I need to ask you a favor. Whatever it is, we need your daughter to cooperate with us to set a trap for the Mullins." "What kind of trap?" "Edward and Sophie don't know we've connected the Mullins to the operation. When they get out on bail, which will happen, because their lawyers are very good, they are going to report to their bosses that something went wrong. We want Hope to pretend she has decided not to press charges, that she is embarrassed and just wants everything to disappear." The mere idea made me shiver. "Detective, my daughter is barely processing what happened to her. Now you want her to act as if she were willing to forgive the people who planned to kill her? I understand your reservations. But if the Mullins believe Hope isn't going to be a problem, they might try to contact her directly to apologize, or to ensure she maintains silence. And that would help us, because it would give them the opportunity to incriminate themselves, to admit knowledge of the full operation." I leaned back in the chair, feeling the weight of the decision. On one hand, I wanted to keep Hope as far away as possible from this whole situation. On the other hand, there were 15 other victims who deserved justice. "Detective, what happened to Patty Miller, the woman who ended up with brain damage?" Detective Russo tensed. "What makes you think we know something about Patty Miller?" "Because," I said with the patience of a woman who had already suspected the answer, "when people like Edward and Sophie casually mention someone had a convenient accident, it usually means the accident wasn't so accidental. We are investigating Patty's case. Her doctors always thought her injuries were inconsistent with a simple fall down the stairs, meaning she was pushed, meaning her injuries suggest she was struck with something before falling." I closed my eyes and counted to 10, trying not to imagine my Hope in Patty's place. "Detective, if I agree to let Hope cooperate with you, I need guarantees." "What kind of guarantees?" "Guarantees that she will never be alone with any of these people. Guarantees that you are going to arrest the Mullins before they have a chance to hurt anyone else. And guarantees that my daughter will have protection until this nightmare ends." "I can give you all those guarantees, Mrs. Saunders. And if something goes wrong," Detective Russo looked me directly in the eyes, "if something goes wrong, Mrs. Saunders, it will be because I made a mistake. And I promise you I am not going to make mistakes when it comes to your daughter's safety." There was something in her tone that told me this investigation was personal for her too. "Detective, is there something you aren't telling me?" "My younger sister was a victim of a romance scam 2 years ago. Different organization, but the same type of manipulation. She lost her college savings and took months to recover emotionally." "Did you catch the people responsible?" "No. They took off before we could gather enough evidence." Detective Russo leaned forward. "This is my chance to ensure this doesn't happen to anyone else." I understood her completely. After all, I had spent the last 24 hours feeling exactly the same determination. "Detective, talk to Hope. If she is willing to help, I support her decision. But with one condition, which is, I am going to be involved in this operation too, not as a passive observer, but as an active participant." "Mrs. Saunders, that is irregular." "Detective?" I interrupted her. "Yesterday I proved I am quite capable of handling professional con artists, and I know my daughter better than any trained officer. What exactly are you proposing?" "I am proposing you use me as the element the Mullins will never see coming. Because I bet in 3 years of training con artists, they never taught them how to deal with a protective mother who has decided that polite time is over." Detective Russo smiled for the first time since we started talking. "Mrs. Saunders, I really like your style." Hope agreed to cooperate with the investigation, but only after making me promise I would be present every step of the way. Mom, she told me while we ate in my kitchen that night, if we are going to do this, I need to know my support system is solid, and you are my support system. I have always been your support system, sweetie. It's just that for a while you let other people convince you that you didn't need me. I'm never going to make that mistake again, she promised. Detective Russo's plan was relatively simple. Hope was going to return to work on Monday and act as if nothing had changed. If anyone asked about Edward and Sophie, she was going to say it had been a big misunderstanding, that she had decided not to press charges, and that she just wanted to move on with her life. The key, explained Detective Russo during our Friday afternoon meeting, is to appear vulnerable, but not suspicious, like you are embarrassed by the whole situation and want it to disappear. It's not going to be hard to act embarrassed, admitted Hope, because part of me really is embarrassed to have been so gullible. That is exactly the attitude we need to project, said Detective Russo. The Mullins look for victims who blame themselves instead of seeking justice. My role in the operation was seemingly simple. Continue being the protective mother who insisted on checking that Hope was okay. If the Mullins made contact, my constant presence would give them a sense of security. After all, how dangerous can a 62-year-old grandmother be? What they didn't know was that this particular grandmother had spent the last 3 days studying every detail of their operation as if it were a doctoral thesis. Monday arrived too fast and too slow at the same time. I accompanied Hope to work, officially because my car was in the shop, unofficially because I wanted to see the faces of her colleagues when they found out she had forgiven Edward and Sophie. Mary, the receptionist told me when we entered the building, good to see you. Hope. Hun, we are all so shocked by what happened Wednesday. It was a misunderstanding, replied Hope, with the perfect voice of a woman who wants to change the subject. These things happen, but it's true that Edward and Sophie, as I said, it was a misunderstanding. Everything is resolved. Hope took my arm. Mom, let's go to my office. While we walked down the hall, I could feel the eyes of every employee following us. Conversations stopped as we passed and resumed in whispers when we had gone by. This is uncomfortable, muttered Hope. It's supposed to be uncomfortable, I reminded her. If you act too comfortable, they'll suspect. In her office, Hope checked her messages while I pretended to read a magazine. In reality, I was watching every person who passed the hallway, memorizing who seemed too interested in my daughter's activities. At 10:30, a woman I didn't recognize knocked on the office door. Hope? I'm Carmen Ruiz from HR. Could you come to my office for a moment? Hope looked at me. We had rehearsed for this possibility. Sure, Carmen. Mom, can you wait for me here? Of course, sweetie. After they left, I immediately took out my phone and dialed the number Detective Russo had given me. Detective, this is Mary Saunders. A woman from HR just took Hope for a private meeting. Name, Carmen Ruiz. There is no Carmen Ruiz in the HR department of that company, Mrs. Saunders. I felt as if I had swallowed a stone. What do I do? Stay where you are. We are on our way. I hung up and tried to look like a bored mother waiting for her daughter. In reality, I was calculating how long it would take me to get to the HR department if I had to scream for help while running. 5 minutes later, Hope returned with an expression that told me immediately something was wrong. Everything okay, sweetie? Yes, Mom, just company paperwork, but her eyes were sending me a different message, danger. Well then, let's go. You promised to help me with grocery shopping, remember? We hadn't made plans to go to the grocery store, but Hope nodded immediately. Sure, Mom, let's go. We left the building, walking casually, as if we weren't in a hurry. It wasn't until we were in my car that Hope slumped over. Mom, that wasn't Carmen from HR. It was a woman who says she knows Edward and Sophie. She gave me this. She handed me a fancy business card that read, Claudia Mullins, Strategic Relations Consultant. What exactly did she tell you? That Edward and Sophie had told her about our misunderstanding and that she wanted to make sure I was okay. That sometimes young couples make mistakes and she wanted to help resolve any remaining confusion. And what did you tell her? That I appreciated her concern, but everything was resolved, that I just wanted to move on with my life. How did she react? She told me it was very mature of me to forgive and forget, and then she asked if I had spoken to anyone else about the situation. I started the car and drove out of the parking lot. Did you tell her you hadn't spoken to the police? I told her my mother and I had decided to handle it as a private family matter. Good. Anything else? Yes. Hope looked at me with frightened eyes. She invited me to lunch tomorrow. She said she wanted to apologize on behalf of Edward and Sophie and possibly discuss compensation for the trouble. A compensation. Her exact words were, "Sometimes, when young people make mistakes, mature people like you deserve to be compensated for their understanding." Ah. So they were trying to bribe my daughter to stay quiet. And did you say yes? I told her I needed to think about it, that I would consult with my mother because I value her advice. Perfect. I dialed Detective Russo's number. "Detective, we have contact. The Mullins. Claudia Mullins specifically wants to have lunch with Hope tomorrow to discuss compensation." Excellent. Where? When? They haven't agreed on details yet. Hope is going to confirm this afternoon. Mrs. Saunders, this is exactly what we expected. They are trying to buy Hope's silence, and that is good because it is evidence of consciousness, of guilt. If it had really been just a misunderstanding, they wouldn't need to offer compensation. After hanging up, Hope and I went straight to my house, where we spent the rest of the day coordinating the details of the trap lunch with Detective Russo and her team. "The restaurant is going to be full of undercover officers," Detective Russo assured me that afternoon, "and both you and Claudia Mullins, well, Hope and Claudia, are going to be wearing wires. I will also be wearing a wire." "Wait, I'm wearing a wire too?" "Of course. You are going to be having lunch at a nearby table, pretending it's a coincidence you are in the same restaurant. And if Claudia recognizes me from the photos? There are no photos of you anywhere on Edward and Sophie's social media. They kept their real lives very separate from their scam lives." That night, while Hope slept in her childhood room for the 4th consecutive night, I stayed awake thinking about everything I had learned about human nature in the last week. A week before, the most complicated thing in my life was deciding whether to buy the expensive brand of detergent or settle for the generic. Now I was coordinating undercover operations with the police department and preparing to confront a criminal organization. Life, apparently, can change completely in the time it takes to lock a bathroom door. But I had also learned something more important, that when the people you love are in danger, you discover strengths you didn't know you had. Tomorrow, I was going to meet face-to-face the woman who had trained Edward and Sophie to hurt my daughter, and I was going to make sure it was the last time Claudia Mullins had the opportunity to hurt anyone else. The restaurant, The Terrace, was exactly the type of place where a woman like Claudia Mullins would feel comfortable. White tablecloths, waiters in vests, and prices that screamed, "I have money and I want everyone to know it." I arrived 15 minutes before Hope and asked for a table with a perfect view of the table where she was supposed to sit with Claudia. The microphone taped under my blouse felt like a giant insect, but Detective Russo had assured me it was imperceptible. "Just act natural," she had told me that morning. "Order food, read a book, pretend you are enjoying a quiet lunch alone." Easy for her to say. Detective Russo wasn't the one about to face a woman who trained professional con artists for a living. At 12:30 exactly, I saw Hope enter. She looked perfect. Nervous, but not terrified. Well-dressed, but not too done up like a woman trying to maintain her dignity after an embarrassing situation. Claudia Mullins arrived 5 minutes later. I recognized her immediately from the photographs I had seen at the police station, but in person she was even more impressive. 52 years old, but she looked 40. Designer suit that probably cost more than 6 months of my rent, perfectly styled hair, and makeup that looked like it had been applied by a professional artist. She approached Hope with the smile of a woman used to people doing exactly what she wants. "Hope, darling," I heard her say as they sat down. "Thank you so much for agreeing to see me. I know this must be difficult for you." "I appreciate you coming, Mrs. Mullins," replied Hope with the perfect voice of a woman who wants to be polite but keep distance, although I'm not sure why it was necessary for us to meet. "Please, call me Claudia." She leaned forward with a sympathetic expression, "And it is necessary, because Edward and Sophie are like children to me. When they make mistakes, I feel a personal responsibility." From my table, I pretended to be reading the menu while straining to hear every word. "Mistakes?" asked Hope. "Is that how you see it?" "Oh, darling." Edward told me the whole story. How emotions got out of control, how an innocent situation was misinterpreted. Claudia took Hope's hand across the table. Sometimes young people confuse professional friendship with something more personal. I had to squeeze my napkin to keep from getting up and screaming at her to let go of my daughter's hand. "An innocent situation," repeated Hope slowly. "Being naked in my bathtub is an innocent situation?" "Oh, darling." I understand it must have been shocking to walk in and find that. But Edward explained they had been discussing Sophie's marital problems, and they got into the tub to have privacy because your mother was in the apartment. Naked? Sometimes, when people are very upset emotionally, they don't think clearly about propriety. Claudia released Hope's hand and picked up her menu. The important thing is that it was just a misunderstanding, not a betrayal. And the plan to steal my money? That was also a misunderstanding? Claudia stiffened for a second, so briefly I almost didn't notice. Plan, darling? What are you talking about? Edward confessed they had a plan to access my bank accounts. Oh, that. Claudia laughed as if it were the most ridiculous thing in the world. Edward was trying to sound more important than he is. He had mentioned he wanted to help you organize your finances better after you got married. You know how men are. They always need to feel like they are solving things. After we got married. Well, yes. Edward was planning to propose to you. Didn't he tell you? I saw the information hit Hope like a slap. For a second, her mask of calm slipped, and I could see the real pain in her eyes. No, she said finally. He didn't tell me. Oh, darling. Claudia leaned forward with a compassionate expression. He wasn't supposed to. He wanted it to be a perfect romantic surprise. A perfect romantic surprise, repeated Hope. While having an affair with my best friend? It wasn't an affair. It was emotional confusion. Sophie was going through a difficult divorce, and Edward was trying to be a good friend. A very good friend. Hope, Claudia took a more serious tone. I understand you are hurt. Any woman would be. But do you really want to ruin the lives of two good people for a moment of poor judgment? There was the first real attempt at manipulation. I'm not trying to ruin lives, replied Hope. I'm just trying to process what happened. Of course, and that is completely natural. Claudia took her bag and pulled out an envelope. But I also think you deserve compensation for the emotional pain they have caused you. Compensation? Edward and Sophie have pooled money to show how much they regret what happened. It's not much, but it's a gesture of good faith. Hope took the envelope but didn't open it. How much? Iwan. I felt as if someone had set fire to my chair. $10,000 to buy my daughter's silence about a plan that would have resulted in her death. It's a lot of money, said Hope carefully. It's what Edward would have spent on the engagement ring, explained Claudia. Think of it as if he had bought the ring anyway, but now you can use the money for something you really need. Like what? Well, you could take a vacation, get away from all this drama, or maybe invest in your career, take some additional courses, or I could stay quiet about what really happened. Claudia laughed, but there was an edge to the sound. Darling, what would you stay quiet about? We already agreed it was all a misunderstanding. Of course, said Hope quickly. I was just, well, it's a lot of money. It makes me wonder if there is anything else I should know. Like what? I don't know. Have Edward and Sophie had similar misunderstandings before? The change in Claudia was subtle but unmistakable. Her smile became tighter, her eyes more calculating. Why do you ask that? Because if it's a pattern, maybe I wasn't the only woman who felt confused by their behavior. Hope, I think you are overthinking this. Probably. It's just that my mother always tells me that if something seems too good to be true, it usually is. Your mother sounds very wise. She is. In fact, Hope looked casually around the restaurant. I think that's her. Claudia followed Hope's gaze directly to my table. Your mother is here? What a coincidence. Mom, come here. I got up from my table with the perfect surprise of a mother who accidentally runs into her daughter in a public restaurant. My sweetie, what a coincidence. I walked to their table, watching as Claudia evaluated me quickly. I could see her calculations. Older woman, well-dressed but not expensive, posture suggesting confidence but not aggression. In short, exactly what she would expect from the mother of an ideal victim. Claudia, I'd like you to meet my mother, Mary Saunders. Mom, this is Claudia Mullins. She's a colleague from work. Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Mullins, I said, shaking her hand. The pleasure is mine, Mrs. Saunders. Your daughter is a very impressive woman. That's what they've always told me. I sat in the empty chair without being invited. Excuse me for interrupting, but when I saw Hope, I couldn't resist coming to say hello. Don't worry, said Claudia, but I could see she was worried. Actually, I'm very glad to meet the woman who raised such a wonderful daughter. Oh, Hope has always been special, very trusting, very generous with people. I looked her directly in the eyes. Sometimes too generous. Well, generosity is a beautiful virtue in a young woman. Yes, I agreed. Although I have learned that some people confuse it with naivety. Claudia held my gaze without wavering. Fortunately, Hope has a mother who clearly protects her. I do what I can. Although I must admit that sometimes I worry about the people my daughter meets at work. Oh? Why? Well, recently there was a situation with some of her colleagues that unsettled me quite a bit. Mom, interrupted Hope quickly, I don't think Claudia needs to hear about that. Actually, said Claudia, and now there was steel in her voice, I would love to hear a protective mother's perspective. It was in that moment that I realized Claudia Mullins wasn't just a facilitator. She was a predator who had decided I was a threat that needed to be assessed. A protective mother's perspective, I repeated slowly, holding Claudia's gaze. It's quite simple, actually. Please, share, said Claudia. And there was something in her tone that told me this conversation had stopped being about Edward and Sophie. A protective mother learns to recognize certain patterns, I explained, keeping my voice conversational. For example, when someone says something was a misunderstanding but offers $10,000 in compensation, it suggests that maybe the misunderstanding wasn't as small as they pretend. Claudia laughed, but the sound had nothing genuine in it. Mrs. Saunders, I think you are misinterpreting the situation. Really? Because from my perspective, it looks like you are trying to buy my daughter's silence about something that goes far beyond simple infidelity. Mom, said Hope nervously, maybe we should. No, sweetie. I think Mrs. Mullins and I need to have an honest conversation. I leaned forward. Do you know what else experience taught me, Mrs. Mullins? What? That when someone trains young people to scam money from single women, they generally don't stop at just one victim. The change in Claudia was instant and terrifying. The mask of the understanding woman disappeared completely, replaced by something cold and calculating. Mrs. Saunders, I think you are making very serious accusations, without evidence. Oh, I have evidence. I took out my phone and put a photo on the table. It was Patty Miller in her wheelchair, taken from a newspaper article about domestic violence victims that Detective Russo had found. Do you recognize this woman? Claudia looked at the photo without expression. No. It's Patty Miller. Edward was engaged to her before she had her accident. I don't know what you are talking about. No? Because I have recordings of Edward and Sophie talking about their pattern of victims. Carmen Ross, $5,000. Lucy Vance, $25,000. Patty Miller, $90,000. And permanent brain damage. For the first time since I met her, Claudia looked genuinely surprised. Recordings? 43 minutes of full confessions, including the part where they discussed their plan to drug my daughter and make it look like an accident. Claudia looked around the restaurant, clearly calculating her options. Even if that were true, it has nothing to do with me, does it? I smiled with all the sweetness of a grandma offering cookies. Because I also have photos of Edward and Sophie on multiple expensive vacations with you and your husband, and bank records showing transfers from the victims' accounts to shell companies controlled by you. This was a complete lie. I didn't have bank records yet, but Claudia's reaction told me I had hit the nail on the head. I don't know who told you those lies. Nobody told me anything. Mrs. Mullins, I discovered it myself. Because you made the mistake of underestimating a mother who knows her daughter well enough to know when something is wrong. Claudia stood up abruptly. This conversation is over. No, I said, standing up too. This conversation is just beginning. It was then that customers at nearby tables stood up simultaneously, showing police badges. Claudia Mullins, said Detective Russo, appearing next to our table. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, and assault with intent to murder. Claudia looked around the restaurant, finally understanding she had walked straight into a trap. This is entrapment, she said as Detective Russo put the handcuffs on her. No, Mrs. Mullins, I replied. This is justice. Did you get everything? I asked Detective Russo as they took Claudia away. Every word. Her implicit admission of knowledge about the previous victims, her bribery attempt, and especially her lack of surprise when you mentioned the plan to drug Hope. Is it enough for a conviction? Combined with the confessions of Edward and Sophie and the evidence we have gathered on the other victims, it's more than enough. 3 hours later, we were at the police station again, this time giving final statements. "Mrs. Saunders," said Detective Russo after we finished, "I want you to know your work as a civilian has been extraordinary. We have arrested the entire ring." "The entire ring?" "Robert Mullins was arrested this morning in Phoenix, and we have identified 6 more couples working for them. All will be arrested in the next 48 hours. And the victims, 17 inches total, will all be contacted and given the opportunity to recover at least part of their money from the confiscated assets." "Including Patty Miller?" "Especially Patty Miller. Plus, now we have evidence to reopen her case as attempted murder instead of an accident." That night, Hope and I sat in my kitchen with a bottle of wine I had been saving for a special occasion. "Mom," said Hope after her second glass, "I still can't believe you solved an entire criminal organization." "I didn't solve anything, sweetie. I just refused to let them hurt my daughter." "How did you know to ask all the right questions? How did you know what to press and when?" 62 years, raising people, working with people, observing people. You learn to read between the lines. But the recordings, the documentation, the way you handled Claudia today. Hope, do you know the difference between a mom and a professional detective? What? A detective looks for evidence to solve a case. A mother looks for evidence to protect her children. I took her hand. "And when you threaten a mother's children, you have just awakened the most relentless force of nature." Hope laughed, but then got serious. "Mom, can you forgive me for pushing you away, for not listening to your warnings, for being so—" "Stop," I interrupted her. "There is nothing to forgive. You were a victim of people who are experts in manipulation, and besides, without their manipulation, I never would have had the chance to prove that an American grandma can be more dangerous than any professional con artist. What is going to happen now? Now you are going to go back to your normal life. You are going to make new friends, more carefully this time, but without fear. You are going to find love again more wisely this time, but without cynicism. And what are you going to do?" I smiled. "I'm going to go back to being a normal grandma who worries if her daughter is eating enough vegetables. Just that." "Well," I admitted, Detective Russo mentioned the police department is considering a pilot program of civilian consultants for fraud cases. "Mom, did they offer you a job?" "They offered me the chance to make sure what happened to you never happens to another family." Hope smiled for the first time in a week with pure happiness. "Mom, I think you just found your true calling." 2 months later, I received a letter from Patty Miller. She had recovered enough memory to remember fragments of what Edward had done to her and wanted to thank me for helping bring her attackers to justice. "Mrs. Saunders," she wrote, "my family says you are the reason we finally have answers. I can't remember everything that happened to me, but I remember the feeling that something was wrong. Thank you for listening to that feeling and acting on it." At the bottom of the envelope was a photo. Patty, in physical therapy, smiling while holding a painting she had created. The brain damage had affected her memory, but she had discovered an artistic talent she never knew she had. Sometimes, she had written on the back of the photo, "Terrible things lead us to discover strengths we didn't know we possessed." I put the photo on my refrigerator, right next to a new photo of Hope and me at her graduation from a self-defense course she had decided to take. Because I had learned that the best gift a mother can give her daughter is not to protect her from all the bad things in the world, but to teach her that she herself has the strength to face whatever life presents her. And if she needs help, well, that's what mothers are for. Especially mothers who have discovered that revenge is best served with meticulous documentation and the cooperation of local authorities.